We will now interrupt your regularly scheduled programming for this Good Old Blades micro podcast.
Lasers and knife making. Two of my favorite things, because who doesn't love lasers? And, obviously bias, but who doesn't love knife making as well, right? There are a plethora of uses for lasers in knife making. And a lot of those things are really just being discovered by small shops and artisan makers and things like that today. But lasers have been in use as early as the 60s, specifically diode and CO2 style lasers. And now with the advent of fiber lasers, it's a little bit more obtainable to do certain types of engraving and cutting for a fairly nominal cost. I'm not going to say any laser is cheap, but let's kind of get into that. Now, as I mentioned, there's really three laser types: diode, CO2, and fiber. And the technology varies a little bit in how the lasers are focused and how strong they are, and thus how well they cut things, right? And diodes are probably some of the less expensive, followed by CO2, depending on power, followed by fiber. And it's just because the fiber technology, it's a much stronger laser, so you're going to probably spend a little bit more because of the versatility. Now, if you're a gun and knife person, the fiber laser will get you very far, because you can do both gun and knife engraving, as well as just engraving anything else under the sun. But specifically I have a diode laser, and the purposes that I got it for was to be able to cut out wood. Thinner plywood. I believe mine can go up, it's a 20 watt, and can go up to like a quarter of an inch cutting, plywood and other types of wood. I got it for cutting leather, and I got it for engraving pattern profiles on steel, so that way I can cut them out to the line or grind them to the line and design things on CAD or on a two-dimensional CAD software in order to be able to play around with things. So the thing that I really like about that is it's changed the way that I think about designing things, where before I would take paper and I would draft everything out on paper, and then I would cut it out, and then I would feel it to see, what does it look like in my hand, and then maybe I would transpose that onto wood or something, and then finally steel, and then I make my final prototypes on steel. Well, what I can do functionally is I can take the concepts that I'm looking for in knives and design everything out in several different types of software, that as long as they're vector softwares that allow point to point, basically you can create anything, and you can scale it indefinitely, and there's no distortion on your lines or anything like that. So one free software that's really good for that is Inkscape. There are some challenges to how you manipulate things in Inkscape, but it's free, and there's a decent amount of documentation on it, and so you can use that. And you if you're using AutoCAD or any of these other fairly high-end from a feature and cost perspective softwares, you can design everything up into 3D models and imagery and everything, and you can pipe those through SVG files into your laser and cut them out or engrave them or whatever. But for the sake of most things inside of laser work, you're going to be making two-dimensional models. And that's primarily anything to do with engraving or cutting, or that's pretty much my focus. It's going to just be two-dimensional. So One really good thing that lasers can do is etch maker's marks or patterns or things like that, like designs on steel. You can do this with lower powered lasers, but you typically have to have some type of agent or coloration on the blade, so that way the laser will absorb into the material itself. So there's some things like acrylics and glasses, like opaque and clear materials that don't laser very well. And if you apply like black Sharpie, that's what I do for all of my patterns. So I have a lower power laser, and because of that, it doesn't really etch very well into steel. However, if I apply black Sharpie to it, it will eat into the steel a little bit and leave lines. And it doesn't matter how hot I get that thing; those lines still remain because they're just below the surface. So it is actually etching into the steel. There's other types of agents that you can use, but that's the one I use. I mean, it's cheap, and I'd use it for scribing things as well when I'm doing patterns. So the other thing is I really like a laser for leather work, because I don't really feel like I was that great of a sheath maker before, mostly because cutting out patterns for leather, it just didn't look very great, not super clean lines. And there is a learning curve to that when you're making sheaths. Well, a laser doesn't really care about that. As long as your power settings are correct, you can go through and scale up or down as much as you need to. You can build prototypes by cutting them out on the laser and putting them together with glue or things like that, and you can get a really great idea of how that sheath is supposed to operate before you finalize your pattern, and you go from there. So I really like that. The only thing I will say is that there are certain things that it's not really easy to cut out on lasers, and there are some danger associated with it. So in leather work, I will cut out veg tan only. If you're doing any chrome tans or anything like that, sometimes it can cause gases and other corrosives to get into your machinery, and you do not want that. Although I'm sure that it can cut just fine, your ventilation has to be really good, and you have to clean your laser, and that's not worth it to me. So what I will typically do is if I'm doing any inlays, I will cut those out by hand, because they don't need to be like exactly perfect. And then for the profiles on everything with veg tan, I'll cut all that out, because obviously it's a less expensive material to use as well. When you are getting into the initial process of lasers, you're going to have to choose which laser you're going to invest in. You can get things for under $1,000. I think mine is between the $1,000 and $2,000 range. And if you go into the fiber lasers, which is the highest end, typically, depending on bed size, you're going to look into maybe the $2,000 to $6,000 range. Again, not cheap, but if you think about how much you invest in all the tools and processes and things to do what a laser can help you with. So, for instance, instead of doing electro etching or engraving by hand or a pantograph, you can pipe that into a laser and have it engrave your maker's mark or patterns, like designs or things like that you want on a blade. If you're making sheaths or you have to parts them out, but it becomes a lot simpler for you to design in CAD of some sort and get it all cut out. I mean, you could be saving quite a lot of money by removing the things that you're not really great at, like cutting things out or even engraving certain patterns on leather. You can do that with lasers. Patterns, it's one of those things where the prototyping process for me is fairly methodical, so I spend a lot of time doing it, and the laser has saved me a lot of time. and being able to design everything, check out dimensions and whatnot, and then just laser it directly to steel, and then I just cut out the steel, and I'm within a few thousandths typically of where I need to be versus a few hundred thousandths, and then I have to play with it and go through the process of lather, rinse, repeat. Now, I mean, it's more important for that when you're doing folding mechanisms on knives versus fixed blades, but sometimes the parameters on fixed blades are even tight enough where you need to be in the thousands range instead of the 100,000. So something to think about for sure. I definitely don't think it's for everyone. It is an investment, and it does take time to learn everything. But once you get the hang of it, it is very beneficial for a time-saving perspective. And I think that you will find that over time, if you crunch the numbers, the benefit to having lasers far outweighs the cost, at least in my mind, because of everything that I've done with increasing accuracy and productivity in the knife shop. So it's something to think about. I hope that helps. There's lots of documentation out there on different laser types and everything, and I encourage you to go out there and read it, because it's not probably in your best interest that I explain those things or try to turn them into layman's terms, because even me, I don't understand all about the technology. But really, the more expensive it is, generally in laser technology, the better it is, and the lower cost it is. Usually, you have a weaker laser and a shorter bed size, so the distance that the laser can travel in an XY coordinates in order to be able to fit your work on it. So you want a fairly substantial bed size to be able to do certain types of things, especially if you're doing like longer buoys or things like that. If you're cutting leather, for instance, if you're just doing logos, you can deal with a fairly small size. But again, it's all in what you need for what you're doing. It takes a lot of research, and I don't regret the multiple months and many hours of research that I did on all of those before I went ahead and purchased my laser. I think that if I had maybe about double the amount, I would have gone with a fiber laser. But even still, I'm still really happy with the diode. I do a lot of things on it. So ask if there's any questions. I'm more than happy to help and point you in the right direction of software or particular models of lasers. But your own research will go a long way, because if you're spending that kind of money, you really need to be sure that it's beneficial to you. Hope that helps.